Hello everyone, my name is Sean and welcome to my channel where I talk about languages and the people who speak them. While I'm busy learning Greenlandic, it's time for us to talk about another language beginning with the letter G that wasn't able to be featured in last week's video. And today's pick for the honorable mentions is the one, the only, the mighty Gagauz language. Gagauz, also known as Gagauz or Gagauzia, is mostly native to the southern regions of Moldova and Ukraine, in both of which it's a recognized minority language. In Ukraine, it's spoken mostly in the Odessa region, while in Moldova, it's spoken in the autonomous region of Gagauzia, which I'll talk about in a minute, in which Gagauz is the national language and one of the official languages, alongside Moldovan and Russian. Gagauz is part of the Western Oghuz branch of the Turkic language family, with its closest relatives being Turkish and Azerbaijani. In fact, when we look at some of the comments at the Sound of the Gagauz Language video by I Love Languages, which is an incredible channel by the way, we can see people say stuff like, "As a Turkish speaker, I understand 100%. As a native Azerbaijani Turkic speaker, I understand it 100%. I always thought Azerbaijani was the closest language to Turkish, but it wasn't. Gagauz is not just close, it's the same language. Only the accent of the language is slightly different, but Turks living in the Balkan regions of Turkey also speak with this accent." So then the valid question to ask is this even a separate language? What's so special about Gagauz? Whichever way you look at the language situation, it's the Gagauz people themselves I find incredibly interesting. They're a bit of an anomaly, and they really aren't talked about that much, so I thought it'd be cool to put them in the spotlight for a second. The origins of the Gagauz people are kind of obscure. According to various historians, there's a good 20 different theories of where they came from, with none being 100% concrete. The general consensus is that they are the descendants of ancient semi-nomadic Turkic peoples that came from Central Asia, either the Cumans, the Kipchaks, the Bulgars, or the Seljuk Turks. However, from what I've read, during the late stages of the Ottoman Empire, the Gagauz themselves referred to themselves as either Hasli Bulgar, meaning true Bulgars, or Eski Bulgar, meaning old Bulgars. And just for the sake of context, I think that this theory is worth exploring a bit. So first of all, the Bulgars are a group of semi-nomadic horse-riding warrior tribes hailing from somewhere in the Pontic-Caspian steppe region. They are claimed to be the ancestors of a few different modern-day people groups. They migrated all over Eastern Europe and north of the Caucasus. Eventually, by the second half of the 7th century, some of them settled in the Eastern Balkans, merged with the local Slavic-speaking peoples, and founded the First Bulgarian Empire. These would then go on to become the ancestors of the modern-day Slavic-speaking Bulgarians. Some kept going east up until the Volga River and founded the Volga Bulgaria. These would become the ancestors of the modern-day Volga Tatars of areas such as the Russian republics of Tatarstan and Bashkortostan. Lastly, some Bulgars also settled around the area of Moldova and southern Ukraine, and these would allegedly later become the ancestors of the modern-day Gagauz. Fast forward about 1,000 years, and this becomes even more so prevalent by the first half of the 19th century, when the Russian Empire actually encouraged their migration to the area in order to settle it, especially under the condition that the people converted to Orthodox Christianity. The common geographical term for this whole region back then, by the way, was Bessarabia, which I've always thought that this name was a bit weird because when you say it in Russian, Bessarabia, it kind of sounds a lot like Bez Arabia, which literally means without Arabs. Turns out, completely different etymologies, it has nothing to do with each other, but random side note that I've thought about for years. In a nutshell, the Gagauz are Turkic-speaking, Eastern Orthodox professing, Bulgar-descending Moldovans/Ukrainians. This is why the Gagauz people are so interesting. So many independent variables had to have come together over the course of 2,000 years for them to emerge the way that they are today. Never tell me the odds. However, the ethnonym Gagauz itself is a bit of a mystery in and of its own. There are also a few different theories, with none being 100% definite. As mentioned earlier, the Gagauz used to refer to themselves mostly as a variation of Bulgar. In fact, before the Russian Revolution, the term Gagauz was actually a bit of an insult, and might have even been seen as offensive. So it's interesting that this self-identification shift happened over a relatively short period of time. And just a few years before that, another really cool thing happened. On the 6th of January 1906, the Comrade Republic was proclaimed. It was established as a protest against the Tsarist regime of Russia and was backed by the local Gagauz population. The Comrade Republic only lasted until the 12th of January of the same year though, so 6 days in total. Today, this is largely seen as the first instance of a collective Gagauz majority territorial unit, as well as a precursor to the autonomous region of Gagauzia of today. Between 1918 and 1940, the Gagauz were mostly living under Romanian rule, and then after World War II, the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic was formed. Another thing that's important to mention is that up until now, Gagauz was being written mostly using the Greek alphabet. Yep, Throw in another culture in the mix, cause why not? But since 1957, during Soviet rule, the Gagauz was written primarily using the Cyrillic script. And with that, approximately from 1959 to 1962, Gagauz was actually being taught in schools in the region. A different source says from 1958 to 1961. However, after 3 short years, that came to an end, and Gagauz wouldn't be taught in schools again until the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The year is 1990, the USSR is in shambles, new republics are popping up left, right, and center, and Moldova's unification with Romania has never seemed more likely. And it is then, on the 19th of August, that the independent Gagauz Republic was proclaimed, with its capital being the town of Comrat, just like more than 80 years ago. They also had a really cool flag. However, it wasn't really recognized by anyone, and the whole thing was ruled unconstitutional by the Moldovan government. Nevertheless, it lasted for just over 4 years, being dissolved on the 23rd of December 1994. It was then readmitted into Moldova as a separate autonomous territorial unit of Gagauzia. And this is the way that it is today. Also, the Gagauz alphabet was changed a 3rd time in 1993, this time to the Latin script, modeled after the Turkish alphabet. Okay, that was an extremely condensed and oversimplified version of the history of the Gagauz people. But how does this relate to the language, and what significance does it hold in the lives of people today? Loads of super interesting stuff still to talk about, but first, if you don't mind, I'd like to quickly mention how incredible of an app uTalk is. uTalk is a language learning app of the ages. That crazy owl got nothing on this. uTalk is as interactive as it gets. They employ so many different and fun ways to make sure that you retain your vocabulary while also improving listening, reading, and most importantly, the speaking skill. A lot of apps focus just on reading and writing, which of course is important, but I haven't really seen another app yet that puts as much emphasis on the speaking part as uTalk does. There's a few different games you can play, but the one that I particularly like is the speaking game, where you hear a phrase and then you have to record yourself saying it to advance further, and then compare what you said to how it's supposed to be said. I've heard people oftentimes express how it gives them loads of anxiety when it comes to speaking with native speakers because they're afraid to sound stupid and make mistakes. Well, worry no further, because with uTalk you're the only one that hears your dumb self, which is great in building up the confidence. Did I mention the sheer amount of languages and how much choice you actually get? That's definitely something not many apps have. Greenlandic, Manx, Kuchi, Sami, Uzbek, 5 different types of Arabic, 7 types of English. Like, you can just keep scrolling and scrolling forever. You can also get achievements and earn U-coins, which you can later use to unlock more games and even new languages. I definitely recommend uTalk for everyone. Please go to the link in the description below and use the link uTalk/Sean to receive not 10, not even 20, but 30% off of your purchase. What are you waiting for? Get 30% off today. Honestly, if it wasn't for uTalk, I wouldn't be able to learn nearly as much Greenlandic as I have been over the past week. Do give it a try, and if you do, then be sure to use this link. Now, back to Gagauz. There is such a thing as Gagauz Radio, which is the only official radio channel broadcasting in Gagauz. There is also such a thing as Gagauz Radio Television, which is the only official television channel broadcasting in Gagauz. There's also a whole bunch of different newspapers, such as all of these. But the most notable one seems to be Ana Sözü, which is the only one published entirely in Gagauz. The rest seems to be a mix of Russian and a bit of Moldovan. There's also a limited number of websites in Gagauz, such as Gagauzia.md for example, mostly posting news, culture, and tourism stuff. There's also a Gagauz version of Wikipedia. There's also Gagauz music, which is pretty damn cool, and it sounds like this. There's also a ton of festivals and celebrations, such as the Hidilres Festival, Mother Tongue Festival, November Festival, Mikhail Chakir Remembrance Day, who is this priest who contributed a ton to the development of the Gagauz written language. However, the biggest event seems to be the World Gagauz Convention. It's an event that is held once every 3 years, where Gagauz people come from all over the world to celebrate their national identity. They're usually delegates from places such as Bulgaria, Ukraine, Greece, Turkey, Russia, America, Brazil, and so many more. It is important to mention that a lot of these events and the development of Gagauzia in general is very much supported by Turkey. They are cousins after all, with very similar languages. Many Gagauz people actually travel to Turkey for work to send money to relatives back home. Okay, now despite all that we've listed above, the Gagauz language seems to be sometimes taking the back seat in terms of how important the Gagauz people themselves view it. In schools there are some Gagauz classes a few times a week, but instruction is almost entirely in Russian. Official government documents are in Russian. The bulk of printed publications, including most of the newspapers mentioned above, in Russian. Basically, the Russian language dominates as the language of power and politics. What else is new? At home, it's a bit different. Families usually speak between each other in Gagauz, but they tend to selectively teach children only Russian until a certain age. Here are some examples of Gagauz women describing the situation, how they view it. At home, I speak Gagauz with my husband and my mother-in-law, and Gagauz and Russian with children. I do that so the children know both Gagauz and Russian because they also need to learn Russian. I speak Gagauz with my son, but speak Russian with my little daughter, because my son is older, but I speak Russian with my daughter. She will learn Gagauz anyway because we speak Gagauz in the family, but I want my daughter to acquire Russian correctly from an early age. Gagauzia is too small, and so is her native language. So where else can we go with this language? What can we achieve with Gagauzian? Where and how can we raise ourselves properly? From one point of view, these are all valid concerns. But from another, this creates a situation where Gagauz children learn Russian as their native language, and only then do they get taught Gagauz. This is further exacerbated by the fact that the Gagauz people are quite religious and attend church regularly, and they are mostly Eastern Orthodox Christians, which means more Russian influence. Nevertheless, people do seem to generally cherish their culture, customs, and traditions, and that includes their language as well. The Gagauz are very much aware of the fact that they are their own nation, and they are proud of that. When it comes to the number of speakers, statistics are shaky as usual, with different sources saying different things and being rather inconsistent. The number you see in Wikipedia, which is sourced from Ethnologue in 2014, gives a figure of about 148,000 total speakers. At the same time, a paper by Astrid Menz from the Orient-Institut Istanbul gives a figure of about 200,000 in the abstract of the paper, and then less than 300,000 in the conclusion of the same paper. A different source by the Gruyter Mouton from 2016 gives a figure of about 250,000. Lovely. However, when we look at the official government censuses, which haven't been updated in forever, in Moldova in 2004 there were about 147,000, in Ukraine in 2001 there were about 32,000, and in Russia in 2002 there were about 12,000. Basically, I think it's safe to say that the total number of Gagauz speakers today is somewhere roughly between 150 and 200,000, with it likely being in the lower end. Okay, now before I keep getting carried away with complaining about how research sources can be very inconsistent and frustrating, and believe me, I can talk for hours about that, let's finally get into a bit of the actual linguistics of the Gagauz language. First of all, let's listen to a short clip of what the Gagauz language actually sounds like. If any speakers of other Turkic languages are watching this right now, I'd be curious to know how much you actually understand.
O ta küçük oğlu dedi babasına. Baba, ver varlıktan ne düşer bana? Babası pay etti onlara varlığını. Birkaç günden sonra küçük oğul toplayıp hepsini. Gitti bir uzak devlete. Nerede gezdi hayırsızlıkta dağıtıp hepsini ne vardı onda.
Being a Turkic language, it's quite agglutinating, meaning that there are a lot of different prefixes and suffixes. Here's an example of a single Gagauz word having the meaning of multiple words in English. The typical word order in Turkic languages is subject, object, verb. However, due to the heavy influence of Slavic languages over many centuries, the Gagauz language has started allowing a somewhat freer word order than your typical Turkic language, and it even sometimes allows SVO as well. As discussed above, Gagauz is very close to Turkish, but the biggest differences are probably seen in the phonology and pronunciation of the language. These differences can also be seen in the orthography. Gagauz doesn't have the infamous Turkish soft G. Gagauz has two additional vowel characters. Gagauz has this character, pronounced ts, borrowed from Romanian, and is mostly used in Romanian and Russian loanwords. Another notable difference is that Turkish tries to avoid consonant clusters in initial positions by adding a vowel there. Gagauz doesn't care, so it doesn't do that. Compare the word for stool, which in Turkish is iskemle, while in Gagauz it's skemla. Another thing that distinguishes the two languages is the Gagauz added suffix ka. Turkic languages don't generally have grammatical genders, that is, they don't distinguish between nouns being either male or female, such as in Romance languages like French or Spanish, for example. The suffix basically makes stuff specifically female and is borrowed from Russian. For example, the word resimchi means painter, while resimchika means female painter. The word Rumun is Romanian or Romanian person, but Rumunka is specifically a Romanian woman. So, is Gagauz really a separate language? Why isn't it just considered to be a dialect of Turkish? Well, this isn't the first time that we've been stuck with this question, and it definitely won't be the last. And the answer is usually, it depends. It depends on whether you look at it from a linguistic perspective or from a political perspective. It depends on who you ask. There really is no 100% rule, and there isn't some kind of international committee that determines this kind of stuff. A language is more than just a communication tool. It's a physical manifestation of thousands of years of culture and tradition. I'd say that the Gagauz people are pretty darn unique and have an incredibly rich and interesting history. And the Gagauz language reflects that, especially with the little quirks that distinguish it from Turkish. I wish the Gagauz people the absolute very best. May your language and culture survive and thrive, and may 1,000 generations more pass it on to their own children. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it helps a ton. See you in the next video, where I'll be talking about the Greenlandic language. Have a great day and a wonderful night. Peace out. Tantanalı, emin ederim, inançlı, ezmet, etme, Gagauzia halkına sayma hem koruma insan hem vatandaş haklarını hem serbestliklerini sert uygulama Moldova Respublikası'nın konstitüsyasını, Gagauzia'nın temel kanununu hem başka kanunlarını namuslu tamamlama, bana verilen Gagauzia Başkanı'nın yüksek borçlarını